Final Fantasy has held a special place in my heart in my long history of gaming, honestly because of mostly Final Fantasy XI, the MMO that captured my imagination and the rest of my life for years. But the single player experiences that led me to it were equally meaningful, and in this video I'll be reminiscing on my introduction to the series, my first and greatest love, Final Fantasy IX. So hey guys, it's Hunt for Games, bringing you, as always, a healthy mix of videos on new releases and MMOs, and nostalgia trips to the classics that made us fall in love with games in the first place. And this nostalgic throwback is likely to disgust and appall some of you, because for one who considers themselves a Final Fantasy fan, I've played shockingly little of the series as a whole. While I drowned away years and continue to do so on Final Fantasy XI, I've only ever truly beaten 9 and 10. 3 and 4 I didn't play until I was older and never completed. 7 is a similar story that I attempted after college, in which I probably made it only like halfway. 8 I've only experienced through a demo disc that came with Brave Fencer Musashi. Tactics I enjoyed but didn't plan out my build quite well enough, and eventually it got too difficult for me to continue without significant grinding. 12 was one of those games I just seemed to love, but for whatever reason stopped playing at some point, and 13 just never really interested me. Some of those are timing, I played it too late or too early or something, and others just didn't quite grab me. But 9? Final Fantasy IX will always for me epitomize RPGs, and it's what I've compared every game to since. Now, this isn't to say it's a perfect game or even a perfect RPG, but there's something about your first love that never really fades away. I've later found that many were frustrated with its return to high fantasy from the mechanical and magical style that had swept the world with 7 and 8. But for me, it was everything I'd ever hoped for. Dangerous and frightening magic, memorable characters, swashbuckling airships, and an enchanting love story. As a 12 or 13-year-old, it was just perfect, and the pre-rendered background swept me into its world like few games have. From the opening where you wander the streets of Alexandria as Vivi, I was hooked. I couldn't wait to see more. I bought the book containing a collection of Final Fantasy IX art. It's beautiful. You should buy it. It made me want to craft video games myself to create such rich and beautiful worlds and characters. The story of how I happened about Final Fantasy IX is actually pretty funny too. It was mostly a series of misunderstandings and inaccuracies, but it worked. Final Fantasy was obviously a huge name in the industry, but I'd never played anything beyond the first few moments of the Final Fantasy VIII demo, which I honestly sucked at. Now, to set the stage a little bit, this was when Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time wasn't only my favorite game of all time, which it still is today, but it was fresh in my mind. I mean, I'd only played it for the first time a few years before. I was desperate to find any game even remotely similar, which is how I ended up buying Brave Fencer Musashi. Made by Squaresoft, Brave Fencer Musashi was an exploration by Square into the adventure games made famous by other Legend of Zelda games, with action, puzzles, and a slight hint of RPG elements. While not as captivating as Ocarina of Time, I enjoyed it immensely and was thrilled to have found other games that had a similar vibe to Zelda. Of course, this introduced me to the Final Fantasy VIII demo disc and Squaresoft as a developer. Speaking of which, demo discs have been coming up a lot lately, so if you missed them or the nostalgic days of when they were popular, consider subscribing. We chat about those good old days a lot. So this is where some of the misinformation comes into play, because Musashi had some leveling and HP and MP, so at some point it caused me to encounter the term RPG. By likely my own confusion, I began associating the term action RPG with games like Zelda and Musashi. I mean, it made perfect sense to me. You're playing the role of a character, they're full of action RPG. When Final Fantasy IX was released and was touted as the next great RPG from Squaresoft, I was like, bingo, found my next Ocarina of Time to buy. Of course, it's nothing like Ocarina of Time, but by then it was too late. I'd already made the purchase and I discovered the wonderful world of Gaia and the concept of JRPGs. For someone who had never really explored Final Fantasy, 9 was like a dream. The music was beautiful, the world seemed so vast and full of consequence, and the cutscenes were like nothing I'd ever seen. Sure, other games had cutscenes. I mean, I'd never seen anything like the pre-rendered masterpieces that Final Fantasy IX showed off throughout progressing the storyline. Each was like a gift, the next episode of my favorite TV show, the next few minutes of a movie that I was watching. I ate it up. Games like Metal Gear Solid had showed me that the medium could tell powerful stories that rivaled film in my mind. Final Fantasy IX showed me that someday they might look as good as movies too, and at the time, I mean, I thought they already did. The tales of war and conflict, of tension between nations, questions of identity and self, I mean, Final Fantasy IX hits you with some fairly heavy questions for such a cheerful looking game. For the series, this was nothing new. For my little 13-year-old mind, it was eye-opening. And it did so with a layer of fantasy that I hadn't really been able to experience. The summoned Aeons were such an impressive power. It was terrible and amazing to see them lay waste to these beautiful cities in-game, and then be given that same power for my own battles. I wasn't very good at RPGs. I missed a lot of side quests. I'd get lost easily and forget what I was supposed to be doing. I was often underleveled and rarely approached fights well, but I fumbled my way through and enjoyed every minute of it. It was such an amazing game, and I've wanted to share my experience in obtaining it for a while now. I mean, it was such a strange and confusing path for me to RPGs that I felt like it was important. I tried to decide for a long time how I would approach a video on Final Fantasy IX. Would I focus on the battle system, the characters, the exploration of the world, the story presentation? But all of those can only help lay out why Final Fantasy IX is a good or a bad game in general. And don't worry, they seem like amazing videos to make, and I hope to get to them someday. But the important thing for me was really that Final Fantasy IX was my first. It was my entry to the series. It founded my expectations for the JRPG genre, and especially for Final Fantasy specifically. Presenting on any game, it's always important to try and find a balance between objective information about the game and personal feelings towards it. But this is one example where it's incredibly difficult for me not to let my emotions slide in. Because it's such an important game to me, I felt like that was the perfect way to start the discussion about Final Fantasy IX and to lay out that relationship. But if you guys enjoyed this, let me know and I can get into more detail about why Final Fantasy IX was so special for all its moving parts. Question of the week. What game from your childhood do you see differently because of when or how you played it? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, guys, I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in more videos like this, think about subscribing. And if you already have, don't forget to click that little bell next to the sub button to get notified when new videos go live. Hit me up in the comments with your thoughts on this video, or come hang out and chat with me on Twitch every Tuesday night at 8 PM Eastern Standard Time. And definitely look me up on Twitter or Instagram and Hunt for Games to keep up with what else I've got going on. See ya!